Hello and welcome back to the 12 Days of Christmas Watercolor Challenge. We are already on day 7. I cannot believe that the challenge days are just flying by. Hope you are enjoying it so far. Today we have such a fun one. We are going to be painting this really fluffy white kitty inside of this Christmas wreath. It'll be a super fun, lighthearted tutorial, so don't get worried about, super details. Today we are just going to have fun and paint this really cute cat. So I am actually going to start with my smaller to medium size 6 pointed round brush. And I should also mention that if you are just popping in for the first time, that I have a list of all the previous videos down in the description of this video. You can find out all the information, including on how you can get this free outline sketch. Okay, so yes, my size 6, so anything like a small to medium pointed round brush. And I am going to first begin by painting our kitty. And like I said, it's a white cat, so we're really going to work on just like some basic undertones within this white fur. So here I have my burnt umber, which is a brown. And I need to create some more like neutral colors from that. So I'll grab a little bit of the Payne's Gray and mixing those together. Not a lot of paint, mostly water. So I have barely any paint, and I'm going to create this little like grayish, warm grayish color with these two colors. Okay, so that is the color I'm first going to begin with up here in the cat's ear. So again, I'm just going to grab a little more of the Payne's Gray. Oops, looks like I have a little bit of red over there. Just going to get rid of that. And grabbing a little bit of our gray. And again, I don't have a lot of paint on my brush, just enough to paint that little bit of the cat's ear. All right, I'll just get rid of the paint on my brush, and I'm going to take it and just kind of wash it around up top there, just like that. I am going to leave this little part pretty much white because the white hair of the cat's ear is kind of coming over the top. Let's grab that same mix of color, Payne's Gray and our brown, creating that warm gray color. And that's the color we'll use on this side. And it's okay if you don't get a perfect match. This one came out a little bit cooler. Go ahead and do kind of the same thing. I'll get rid of all the paint on my brush. I'm just going to push around that color, doing my best to leave a little bit of white right there. See if I can get that to focus for you. Yeah. All right. So now again, I am going to work mostly within these kind of warmer browns. So here I have my burnt umber. Just going to grab a tiny bit of it. And this is the color that we'll use to at least create a few little markings for the kitty. So one right above the eyes there, and right above the little nose. And the cat has a little bit that kind of comes around on those cheek areas. I know this is looking funny, but don't worry, we are going to use a little bit of water to help blend that out. All right, so I'm going to stop there for that one. And if you have any of your gray color still mixed up, using just a little bit of that to put it right down the center between all of those brown marks like that. And so now with all of those colors kind of mixing together, let's get rid of the paint on our brush and just pick up a little bit of water. We're going to use that water to just kind of blend those colors before they are dry. I'm just going to grab them and we're just going to blend and fade those colors out from where they're at. So you can kind of see that that is starting to just kind of fade. We don't have a lot of color there. Let's grab a little bit more of our warm, just barely any color there. And let's run that right underneath the cat's mouth on both sides here. All right. So I left his little mouth chin area white so far. I'm gonna grab a little bit more of that brown, and let's just add some towards the outer cheeks. Doesn't need to be perfect. Again, we are just kind of adding in a little bit of fluff and undertones within the white fur. All right, I'll get rid of all the paint on my brush and just use a little bit of a damp brush to start to just pull some of that color towards the outside. Maybe you need to pick up a little bit more water and color. Again, we are just pulling it out. Just like this. So I just grabbed a little more brown. Right now we just have this light tinted fur. So it'll make a lot more sense once we start getting the actual features of the cat, like the nose, the mouth, and the eyes. So for the mouth, I am going to grab a little bit of I have the Alizarin Crimson, and I'm just going to use that. Very light amount of it, so even dab your paper towel, and just running it right along that mouth line there. I'll get rid of all that paint on my brush and just kind of fade it out. I really don't want much of it showing. That was probably a little bit more than I wanted, but I'll be able to darken it up once I go and put the dark line for the mouth. It'll distract from that right there. So as this cat is going to be kind of covered behind, it's sitting behind this bow and also sitting within the wreath, we do want to make sure that it looks like it's sitting back there and need to create a shadow. So I'm going to grab a little bit of the Payne's Gray. You can mix it with our brown. And that's the color. I'm going to run it right down into where that bow is there and kind of on this side as well. So again, this is just going to help us create that shadow. Already looks like it's sitting behind there. Okay. I'm going to start to bring in some of the features of the cat, just so it makes a little more sense. And so I'm going to switch to a tiny brush, only because what I'm working with, the area is so small and I need a little more control. So if you have anything within the zeros, triple zeros, something really tiny like this, that is the one that I want. I also am going to switch to using kind of like I have a French ultramarine blue, and then this is actually a Windsor blue. It's going to be a little brighter, kind of like a sky blue. If you have multiple blues, mixing them together is always a really nice way to create a blue eye. I'm going to use mostly water, and I do have a little bit of paint. I'll dab my paper towel so it's not too wet. And I'm just going to paint in that eye, just like that. I'll do this one as well. And again, not worrying anything about like the actual details. Just go ahead and paint in the blue eyes. I know it looks funny. It'll make a lot more sense once we can do the outline. Now I'm going to grab some of the brown. I have burnt sienna is the color that I'm putting on my brush right now, or you can use some of your burnt umber, any of your browns. And this is the brown I'm going to use to fill in this cat's nose right here, like that. And I could really use a little bit of a darker color just so it doesn't look quite so brown. So I'll grab a little bit of the Payne's Gray, keeping with this tiny brush. I'll just go ahead and drop it into the brown area that we just painted for the nose. So you can see that really helped just to kind of deepen the color there. All right, let's see. I'm gonna grab a little bit more of our Payne's Gray. I'm gonna bring that line down from the nose and then out, kind of running over that pinky reddish color I already painted around the mouth there. If I dab my paper towel, I get rid of a lot of that color, and whatever I have remaining on my brush will be good for doing little tiny dots, just to add a little extra detail. Maybe you got to pick up a little bit more of the cat's whisker area there. Just those little dots like that. All right. Keeping with the same light amount, we will just go ahead and run a few little strokes kind of down and around the cat's nose. You can see what I did there just to help give it a little bit more dimension. And we'll take some of that same, working with like that grayish color that we created up and around the eye here. All right. So now let's go ahead and add, actually I want to add a little bit more detail underneath the chin with that same color scheme we're doing, and then we'll go back through and do our eyes. I'm kind of waiting for the area to dry first. Let's take that grayish color, coming down and around the chin. All right. I'll get rid of that paint on my brush, and we are going to start to grab some of the Payne's Gray. I actually want quite a bit of it. I don't want a lot of water. I want to be able to control exactly where I'm putting the paint. Let me just go ahead and grab a little bit more. I think that will be helpful. So if you need to, if you're working with 2 paints, go ahead. Always replenish your paints as needed. Just put a little bit up there. All right, let's grab. Much better. My Payne's Gray. And again, dab your paper towel if you feel like you just have too much on your brush. So you do want to use kind of a steady hand. If you feel like your brush isn't detailed small enough for the area that you're working in with these eyes, I would just suggest grabbing like a pen. I think you'll get a nice crisp line better with a pen if you feel like your brush isn't just quite pointy enough. Mine's getting a little old, so it's getting on the, a little more frayed side, a little harder to control. But if you have that problem as well, I like to spin my brush in the paint. Kind of gets the bristles and it pulls them together, gives it a nicer point. All right, so I just outlined those eyes. Now let's go ahead and paint the cat's pupil. And usually cat's pupils are like kind of slits. They're all different, but this one is going to have more of like an actual rounded pupil. All right. Something like that. All right, it's looking much more lifelike now that we have the cat's eyes put together there. All right. I am going to switch back to my size 6 just to kind of finish up this kitty here. I just need to add more layers to him. He looks a little flat as of right now. So I'm going to grab my brown and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of the Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray is a super strong color, especially right from the tube like this. So I'm just going to be careful not to pull too much, but I do want kind of that warmish gray color. So something like that. And then I will go ahead and I just want to add a little bit of dark lines to the outer edge and inside of the cat's ear. So something like that. I'm going to do that on this one. So the outer edge, kind of towards the bottom here with those, and then I'll get rid of the paint on my brush and I'll just kind of blot because some of those look a little stripy, just to kind of smooth some of that area out like that. Let's take that same light color. Just going to bring a few little hairs kind of down and around the mouth and cheek area like that. And let's put some just a little bit on the outer edge of the cat's eye, right above it, just to help set in the eyes a little bit. They're not quite so forward, I guess. And then let's add a few more lines and texture down below the cat's neck there. All right, you can kind of see that there's not a lot of paint being applied to the paper. And I do plan to go back through and just kind of soften those areas. Just add a few more up here, right above the cat's eyebrows. And let's go ahead and just add some to the outer edge of the cat on that fur. And this is where I like to use just really thin pressure just to create actual little hairs like this. When you paint something so small like this, you can't get a super detailed illustration. So you just kind of pick up those important details and add in the dimension the best you can. But the bigger the portrait, the more detail you can get. So I'm just going to use a damp brush. And this is what's going to help smooth out some of those areas I was just working on. So I'm just going to run that brush right over top. That just helps to kind of pull it together like that and smooth it out. Okay. I'm going to stop there for the cat part. I might go back once we get the other pieces in there if I need to add any more depth and shadows, anything like that. But for right now, I'm going to move on to the wreath. So I think I'll stick with my same small size 6 pointed round brush. Feel free to move to a larger one if you would like. And I'm actually going to put a little more of my sap green. I have a sap green within my palette here. I'll definitely be using a lot of that in combinations with Payne's Gray to create just a little bit of variety of greens. So the sap green is very candy apple green in my opinion, so it doesn't look quite as natural, and we are going to change that by adding a little bit of our Payne's Gray into there, and that just darkens it a little bit there. Well, the more Payne's Gray you add, the darker it will get, which will be great for adding, you know, dimension within the wreath. And then what I like to do is take this sap green and I can make another really nice color by adding yellow ochre to it. I'm just getting rid of that green. Sometimes we can put a little too much green in our other colors, but that's okay. You can always take your wet brush and scoop off the color. Okay, so now I have a couple different greens to work with. I'm going to start with some of my brighter, lighter greens. And since I'm right-handed, I'll go ahead and start up here with the wreath. And I'm just going to use thin pressure to create these little needles like this. You can kind of see how that's creating more of like a needle-like texture. Just go ahead and grab a variety of greens. And sometimes you can have more paint on your brush, which will create a darker color. Sometimes you can have less and more water. That'll create the lighter color. Okay, so there's a good example of creating one of the pieces of our wreath. Before this dries, what I like to do is grab our darker combination of green that we created and drop that in areas that I know need to be darker, such as where this pine needle area is touching other, it's laying behind other branches. So go ahead and grab your Payne's Gray, just drop it in there, creates a nice darker area. And that'll be how we create our wreath. And we can always go back through after it dries and add more layers. All right, let's go ahead. Just using thin pressure, creating these needles that kind of come out. Pretend like the branch is down the center and then the needles come out on either side, like that. Grab our darker green, drop it in, kind of towards the bottom, like that. And grab a little bit more, and we'll just work our way around. Other areas of the wreath that'll be darker are kind of like towards the inner, you know, the underside of the wreath, towards the inside. You can also use some thin, some thicker strokes, and that'll create thin and thicker needles by just applying more pressure of your brush. All right, a little more of the yellow. Sometimes I just color mix as I go. This. So this one's a little more yellow set in the background here. And I think I'll go back through and add a little bit of darkness to these. But maybe I'll just do a few first and then go back. If you have any crackling of the paper ever, like I sometimes have been doing or getting, all you need to do is just add more water to your brush. It's kind of this happy dance of how much water to paint you have on your brush to create that nice smoother line on the paper. Okay, so I'm going to take my darker green now and I'm going to add it down towards the bottom part of our wreath here. Grab a little bit of the lighter green, add it up top here. And again, remember that if you just add more water to your green, it will become a lighter color. Just like that. Working our way around. I know a lot of this is going to be repetition, which is really enjoyable actually, in my opinion, because then you can just kind of mindlessly paint almost. So sometimes I just pick up a little bit of yellow, and pick up a little more of the Payne's gray. I want to make sure this one's nice and dark. It's sitting back behind our kitty there. And being careful not to paint over the cat's ears. Like that. Feel free that if you want to listen to your own Christmas music while we paint these needles, you definitely can feel free to turn my volume down or your volume down and enjoy your music while we work our way around. Eventually, once we get through these needles, we will paint the bow. I think that adding the detail of these needles and going slow like this is going to pay off. I think it's going to look really, really pretty just to add a little more texture and dimension like this. Again, sometimes you got to grab some of those darker greens, sometimes some lighter greens. And you can tell, sometimes I'm just pressing harder and I'm just covering the areas faster with bigger strokes. And sometimes I'm leaving some to be thinner on the outside. All right, I'm just gonna grab a little more of our yellow ochre, mixing it with our green here. And I wanna make sure I have nice pointy needles on the outer edge here. I do want to take good control and care over how I'm creating the outer edge. All right, gonna grab some of the darker color before I get too far. Again, this part is set behind the cat. And so I want to make sure that it appears darker, especially in these areas down here. So I'm gonna mix the Payne's gray with our green. You can hear my dog tiptoeing in the background. Okay. Leaving little bits of white in between our strokes is going to help us see those needles and that texture a little bit better. All right. Don't forget that even if you don't get it dark enough right away, you can go back and add another layer. Just add a little darkness right here. I know that has to be darker right along and by the bow. I just think this will make such a cute card to send at the holidays. Grab a little more of our, I see some of the green down here. So that was maybe too bright. So I'm gonna grab a little darker color here. Adding a little bit of that in between, going all the way up in between the bow there. Let's add a little bit of our Payne's Gray, drop that in just to make it darker, since we need to show that shadow. And feel free to rotate your painting so your hand doesn't bump. Yeah, you don't want to run your hand. I've done that plenty into your paints. I'm just going to move that over a little bit. And while we are continuing the greenery here, I'll just chat about the challenge, just as a reminder that if you are participating in all of the 12 days, and if you would like to submit your paintings, all you have to do for a chance to win free lifetime access into my signature course, which is Master Watercolor Dog Breeds. So you'll learn how to paint 31 different dogs from start to finish. It's a great course for anybody who loves painting pets, especially dogs, if you're a big dog lover. It's great for both just your enjoyment and learning how to paint a whole variety of different dog breeds. But it's also really great too if you are ever interested in painting dog portraits as either, you know, part-time commissions, extra money. They make amazing holiday gifts. That's usually when I sell the most pet portraits. It's a great course to get started learning how to do that. And if you would like a chance to win at that, go ahead and post your paintings from the challenge over on your Instagram account, and then tag me at Windswept Design Studio. That is where I will be recording all of your entries. And I have all the challenge details down below, as well as being sent out to your emails. So you'll know exactly how to participate and how you can do that. If you don't have Instagram, don't worry. I have, you can send it to me via email. All right, so we are getting closer. Again, rotate your painting as needed, just so you can get a nice place to rest your hand comfortably. Maybe flip it back too if you ever need to just check out what you've done so far. I'm just gonna add a little bit of darkness back down and around the bow, like that. All right, I can see I had a little more in the yellows. So the yellow ochre mixed with our green. I wanna make sure I incorporate that again as I work my way up. Just using that thin pressure as I bring it on the outer edge of our wreath. Okay, there's a little bit of a lighter one there, like that. Add a little more green here. Just like this. And if you ever want a flatter area, just kind of add more paint to your brush. All right, continuing up here. Just gonna grab some of the sap green just to make it a little bit brighter. I'm gonna flip mine back around just so I can fully visualize. This area is pretty dry, so I can leave my hand over there. And grab a little bit darker green combination. I'm gonna drop that into this one right there, and definitely want it on some of these. Again, if you have crackling of the paper, just add a little more water. That will help. Oops. My dog, he's getting impatient, wants to go outside. At least it's sunny here today. We haven't had a lot of sunshine lately, so I'm sure that makes him more excited and wanting to go outside. All right, just gonna add a little bit of the yellow to that one. And one more. Just gonna grab the Payne's Gray, mix it with our green, making sure it's a little bit darker there. Being careful to work around cat's ear. Maybe just a little more green. Just like that. So again, if you wanted to add more dimension in any areas around the wreath, you certainly can do that. I'm gonna add just a little bit of extra needles kind of coming down, just so it looks a little more circular and natural, but you can kind of see how I was just beginning to layer on top of a wet on dry technique. So this area is dry and I was taking my wet paint and it's creating a nice detailed layer, and you certainly could go back and add more dimension that way. I think it'll make a huge impact by just adding a little more depth with the wet and dry, just like that. And we'll just add a few going down. It's okay to leave some of them just kind of as they are, but then just adding a little bit of that darker paint. Again, down around the bow, especially just because that way it's a little bit darker. I'll add some down in here. And then, let's see, we'll do some right around in here. Yeah, a little more there. It's really gonna pop once we put the red bow. Right. And let's see, a little more right there. Okay. I think that looks lovely. Now let's work on our red bow. I'm just going to stick with that same brush, just get all that green off of it. And definitely going to be using the red that is within my palette. So I have the alizarin crimson color. But then if you wanted to brighten it up to make it more of a candy red, you can always mix it with something like this cadmium-free red color, but it's actually more like an orange. So it creates this really pretty kind of candy apple color. So there's that color. And then if I were to mix that orange with it here, just like this, just brightens it up a little bit. All right, I have a decent amount of paint on my brush. I am going to start kind of down. I feel like I almost have too much water and paint on my brush, but I'm going to start closest to where the bow knot is. So I'm going to work around the knot just like this and just kind of put a few little areas and just going to work on the darkest parts, kind of like right there. So kind of see what I did there. Now what I'll do is get rid of the paint mostly on my brush, maybe just have a little bit. We just have this damp brush and I'm just going to bring that color. I want to make sure that the outer edges here of this bow are much lighter. So here we are, bringing it to the outer edge, just like that. You might need to pick up just a little more red, but we don't want as much. And again, we are going to pull that color out and around. Just kind of fill in those sections. Grabbing a little bit more here. Gonna pull it out here. Adding a little bit more water. So you can kind of see how the inner part of the bow is still the darker part. All right, again, do the same on this one. All right, so now before that all dries, I am gonna go ahead and just mix up a little bit of our red with a little bit of our Payne's gray. So you're gonna get this deeper, darker, almost purpley burgundy color. We're gonna run that right around where that knot is. You can see how that created that nice dark area there. And then we're going to bring it, oops, bless you, Dawes. And then we are going to bring it also right along the outer edges of our bow. So I don't have a ton on my brush, just enough to help outline and make some of those areas a little bit darker. Like that. All the way around our edges of our bow. Depending on how wet the area was for you when you painted that base of the bow, it might kind of blend and do a wet on wet technique. That is no big deal. You can always go back and add some more dimension to it. All right, I'm gonna grab more of my mixed up candy colored red. So I have my alizarin crimson and then orange mixed together. And this is where I'm going to paint those ribbon ends, or those, yeah, the tails. That's the word I'm looking for. We're gonna paint the tail. And bringing it all the way down here. Like that. Go ahead and do the same thing for the other one. Just working around the top half of the bow. We want these to be a little bit richer, darker than the bow folds up top here. Just gonna pick up a little bit more water. Blend that down nice to the end of that point. Just like that. Now before that dries, same technique where we're going to bring our red and mix it with our Payne's gray here. It's going to give us that darker purpley light color, and we're going to drop it in right underneath those bow flaps there. How do you like that word? The bow flaps. So we're going to create something like that. Depending on how dry those folded ribbon parts of the bow are, you can go back through and add some of that same color, because now we need to create some little like creases like this. Gives it a nice looking, like, you know, bow where it creates those folds. All right, let's go ahead and get rid of that on our brush. And again, I'm going to grab a lot of the same colors here with that candy apple red to create the center of our bow here. Go ahead and fill that color in there. And yeah, I think that looks great. I'm just going to add a little more color there. All right. And just take a look. You could always go back through and add more dimension to your cat if you need to. We could add little whiskers. One of my favorite ways to add whiskers at the end is to use the Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. Just do that last detail. I'm gonna grab, whoops, drop in water on there. Okay, so I'm just gonna grab a little bit of this white. I'm gonna put it on my palette right here. Spin my brush in there. And it's not gonna stand out a whole lot because our cat is pretty light in color. We can just take that and run it right along. Just adds that nice extra detail. Go ahead and just add a few there. Do some to the other side. Careful not to bump your bow. And adding enough water where it's going to help glide across the paper, but not create it to be too transparent. We want to make sure the white still stands out. All right. This is also a great paint if you want to just add in a little bit of a shine to the cat's eyes like that. Really helps them come more to life, I think. You could use this color to also add just a few more hairs into the ears. It's definitely just one of those finishing touches that just makes a really big difference. Just add a few more up into the ears. And every once in a while, sometimes I'll add it into kind of the chin area, since that's an area that kind of is closer to the camera. All right, there we have our sweet kitty inside of a Christmas wreath. And I think this would make such a fun Christmas card to send at the holidays. So hope you enjoyed today's 12 Days of Christmas Challenge painting. I would love to see your paintings. Please tag me when you post it over at Windswept Design Studio over on Instagram. And I cannot wait to paint with you all tomorrow. Just scroll on down the description of this video to find out more information on how to participate in this 12-day challenge. Thanks so much for being here, and I will see you tomorrow.